As you know, this is a really competitive race, and redistricting kind of throws everything up in the air. So I really, really appreciate having the support and knowing that I can count on you. So thank you. And Robert, thanks for hosting this.
Thank you, Robert.
So I'll just make a quick pitch to you that, this campaign for me is really about reform and using policy to help my community. I think that the council as a body has not been as good as it can be and has not leveraged all the resources that it has and all the potential that it has to deliver for communities. The old school politics of, bringing money and into your neighborhood and giving contracts to your friends and setting up not-for-profits and staffing the board with all your relatives. That's not how you deliver for your community. I think you really need to focus on policy. You really need to focus on introducing legislation. You need to focus on public education on issues. You need to focus on changing regulation. You need to focus on assisting people when class action lawsuits are out there. And that's the kind of work that I want to do on the council. I mean, some of you know me personally, so you know my background. I was in graduate school at the New School. I got a PhD in sociology. I focused on urban issues and poverty and race and labor. And then I went to work in government. I didn't go into academia. I worked for the state comptroller's office for many years. As a fiscal monitor. I had oversight of New York City's finances, and I was an audit planner with oversight of state agencies, state executive agencies, and public authorities. And so that experience has really positioned me well for, a good role, a strong role in policy making on the council. It's also taught me that government and what it does affects us every day. It affects where we send our kids to school. It affects where we live. It affects how much money we can make at our jobs. It affects whether we have health insurance. It affects how quickly we can get to work. So, also our environment, our health, our water, all of these things are conditioned by government, what government does, what it allows corporations to do. And I just feel like we're being left behind in the mix. The economy is supposedly getting better, and we in New York are faced with things like fracking, which could destroy our water supply, pollute our air, and the damage that it does is irreversible. And this is something that government can stop, either by banning it or just not allowing the companies to do the drilling. We have development policies right here in New York City that provide seed money and financing to corporations that don't need it and that don't create good wage-paying jobs here in the city. That's something that can be stopped with policy. We have a lot of small businesses that love to hide under the cover of being minority and women-owned businesses, so they don't have to pay decent wages, so they don't have to give their employees paid sick time. That's something that we can stop in government. So that's just the kind of work that I want to do on a citywide level. Those are some of the issues I'm very interested in. Anything that reduces inequality, that promotes opportunity, that brings people together, I'm going to be behind that kind of progressive work. For many years, I was active in the Working Families Party, which some of you may know. Its signature issue when it first founded was raising the minimum wage. We wouldn't have had a minimum wage increase. It took them over a decade to do it. We wouldn't have had that increase without the work of the Working Families Party. So that's the kind of work that I'd like to do on the council. I can talk a little bit about some issues that I think are relevant to Northern Manhattan. In particular, education. Education is very, very important in our community. We have a large population of Black and Latino students in the school system. As some of you may know, in terms of academic achievement, the Black and Latino students do not perform as well. And when I'm on the council, I'm going to be very, very focused on exploring ways to improve outcomes. And for me, one thing that's very critical is bringing parents back into the system. And I don't mean, going back to the old community school board system. That isn't as necessary as providing the support, the resources, the training, the advice in a more intimate way to parents to help them really be a force in their child's education. I think that we've had some real achievements in the past decade, like our graduation rate increase. I feel that that's real. We had a graduation rate that hovered around 50% for decades in New York City, and that was 50% citywide. And for Black and Latino students, it was much lower. For white students, it was around 70%. For Black and Latino students, it was 30% and below. So to see it near 60% is quite an achievement that we should be celebrating. And instead, we're having the same administration that wants credit for that say, on the other hand, well, we're graduating more, but guess what? They're not prepared for college. So I think when I'm on the council, I'm going to be very focused on trying to drive more resources into the system, because that's what we need. We need more teachers, we need more resources for parents, and for looking at quality and looking at outcomes, and not always raising the bar so that students never meet and the whole system is kind of pervaded with this cynicism. Another important issue in Northern Manhattan is public safety, which I kind of think about in two ways. On the one hand, there's this sense that people aren't safe, that we don't have enough officers, that they can't walk about in their neighborhood safely. There are nuisance establishments that generate crime. There are muggings, there are violent attacks, and people don't feel that the police are responsive. And on the other hand, a substantial portion of our community feels that the police abuse their power. And it shows in, the excess of force that leads to death. It shows in the news. You can read about the cannibal cop. You can read about the rape cops. You can read about the cops who commit robbery in uniform. And for me, these are all problems along a spectrum. So when I'm on the council, I'm going to really focus on local legislation and advocating state legislation to restore accountability in the police department. For me, these are really signs of severe mismanagement and a lack of accountability at the top. And it's not going to change until we put standards into law that actually have consequences. Those are some of the issues I think are kind of important in Northern Manhattan as a whole.